Ancient Egypt pyramid builders. Tonight, we're traveling back to a time when simply surviving a single day required more strength than most of us will ever need. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let me tell you about lives so difficult they'll make your own troubles seem beautifully simple. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. You are a pyramid builder in ancient Egypt in the year 2580 BCE. The sun hasn't risen yet, but you're already awake because the desert heat will soon make work impossible. Your bed is a simple reed mat laid on the dirt floor of a mud brick barracks that you share with 20 other workers. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale bread, and the acrid smoke from oil lamps that burned through the night. You stretch your aching muscles, feeling every stone you lifted yesterday, every step you took up the pyramid's steep ramps. Your hands are permanently stained with limestone dust, your fingernails cracked and bleeding from handling rough blocks all day. Every day, the overseer's horn sounds across the workers' village, a long mournful note that signals the beginning of another endless day. Around you, men groan and cough as they wake, spitting dust from their throats, rubbing sand from their eyes. You reach for your water jar, a simple clay vessel that holds your daily ration. The water is warm, slightly brackish, and tastes of the Nile mud from which it came, but it's precious, more valuable than gold in this desert wasteland, and you drink it slowly, savoring each drop. Your breakfast is a piece of bread, hard as stone, made from barley and sand. You dip it in the warm water to soften it, chewing carefully to avoid breaking your teeth on the inevitable grains of sand mixed into the flour. There's also a small portion of onions, raw and pungent, that burns your throat but provides some protection against the diseases that sweep through the workers' camps. Outside, the pre-dawn air is cool, almost cold, a brief respite before the sun turns the desert into a furnace. You can see the Great Pyramid in the distance, a massive triangle of white limestone that catches the first rays of sunlight like a beacon. It's been under construction for 10 years now, and it's still not finished. You walk to the work site, your feet sinking into sand that's already warm, despite the early hour. The path is well worn, trampled by thousands of workers who make this same journey every day. Carrying stones, hauling rope, dragging sledges loaded with limestone blocks, the pyramid rises before you, layer by layer, each stone perfectly cut and fitted. You know every inch of this structure because you've helped build it, block by block, day by day. Your hands have touched every stone in the lower courses. Your back has bent under the weight of countless loads. You're assigned to a gang of 20 men, led by a foreman who carries a stick and isn't afraid to use it. Your job today, like every day, is to move stones. Limestone blocks, each weighing as much as a small house, that must be dragged from the quarry to the pyramid, then hauled up the ramps to their final position. The work begins before sunrise, in the blessed coolness of dawn. You and your gang position yourselves around a massive block, wrapping thick ropes around its edges. The stone is rough and unforgiving, scraping your hands raw despite the leather wraps you wear for protection. "Heave," calls the foreman, and 20 men pull in unison, straining against the weight. The block moves, slowly, grudgingly, sliding across wooden rollers that groan under the pressure. You can feel the rope cutting into your shoulders, the muscles in your legs burning with the effort. Step by step, you drag the stone across the desert sand, following a path worn smooth by countless other blocks. The sun climbs higher, and the air grows warmer, then hot, then unbearable. Sweat pours down your face, stinging your eyes, soaking your linen tunic. The pyramid's base is massive, over 400 cubits on each side, and it takes time to drag each block from the outer edge to the ramps that spiral up the sides. You move in rhythm with your gang, pulling together, resting together, suffering together. When you reach the ramp, the real work begins. The incline is steep, perhaps 1 in 10, and hauling a multi-ton block up this slope requires every ounce of strength you possess. You lean into the ropes, your feet scrambling for purchase on the smooth stone surface. Other gangs work alongside you, each pulling their own loads, each struggling with the same back-breaking labor. The air fills with the sound of groaning men, creaking ropes, and the harsh scrape of stone against stone. Dust rises in clouds, coating everything in a fine layer of limestone powder. You climb higher, step by step, the pyramid's surface stretching endlessly above you. The ramp switchbacks across the face of the structure, and you can see other workers far below, looking like ants as they drag their own burdens across the desert floor. The sun is fully up now, a merciless disk of fire that turns the limestone into a furnace. The stone beneath your feet is too hot to touch with bare skin, and you can feel the heat radiating up through your sandals. Your water ration is already half gone, and it's not even midday. At the top of the ramp, skilled masons wait to position the block you've delivered. They use bronze crowbars and wooden levers to maneuver the stone into place, checking its alignment with instruments you don't understand. Your job is simply to deliver the raw material, these massive chunks of rock that will outlast your children's children. The descent is easier, but not easy. Your legs shake with exhaustion, your shoulders ache from the ropes, and your throat is parched despite the water you've drunk. But there's no rest, no pause, because another block waits at the bottom, and the work must continue. The cycle repeats, endlessly, mechanically. Load, drag, climb, deliver, descend, repeat. The sun climbs higher, the heat becomes unbearable, and still the work continues. You learn to move in a kind of trance, your body operating on muscle memory, while your mind retreats to cooler, darker places. Other workers stumble and fall, overcome by heat and exhaustion. They're carried to the shade and doused with precious water, if any is available. Some recover and return to work, others are carried away, their places taken by fresh men from the villages along the Nile. You've seen men die on these ramps, their hearts giving out under the strain, their bodies simply unable to continue. The desert doesn't care about human suffering, doesn't pause for death or injury. The work continues, because the pyramid must be built, because the pharaoh demands it, because that's how things are. The midday break comes like a blessing from the gods. You collapse in the shade of a temporary shelter, your body trembling with exhaustion. The bread they give you is the same hard barley loaf as breakfast, but now it tastes like the finest delicacy. The water is warm and muddy, but it's life itself flowing down your throat. You close your eyes and try to rest, but sleep is difficult in the heat. Around you, other workers lie like corpses, too tired to speak, too exhausted to move. The silence is broken only by labored breathing and the occasional groan of pain. Too soon, the horn sounds again, calling you back to work. The afternoon shift is the hardest, when the sun is at its peak and the stones are too hot to handle without thick gloves. You wrap your hands in extra cloth and return to the endless cycle of lifting, dragging, climbing. The heat is so intense now that the air shimmers like water, and the pyramid seems to dance in the distance. You work more slowly, carefully, because a mistake now could mean death. A stumble on the ramp, a rope that breaks under the strain, a moment of inattention, and you could fall to the desert floor below. The work becomes a kind of meditation, a rhythmic repetition that numbs the mind and body. Pull, step, breathe if you can, drink if water is available, continue, because stopping isn't an option. Your world shrinks to the stone in front of you, the rope in your hands, the next step up the ramp. As the afternoon wears on, the limestone begins to cool slightly, though it's still hot enough to burn. Shadows start to creep across the pyramid's face, providing blessed relief from the direct sunlight. The pace of work increases as the coolness returns, everyone eager to make progress while conditions improve. You deliver your final load of the day as the sun touches the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Your body is beyond exhaustion, running on pure determination and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same routine all over again. The walk back to the workers' village is a blur of pain and fatigue. Your legs barely support your weight, your hands are raw and bleeding, and your throat feels like it's lined with sand. But you're alive. You've survived another day. And that's more than some can say. Dinner is the same as breakfast: hard bread, onions, and precious water. But after a day of back-breaking labor, even this simple meal tastes like a feast. You eat slowly, mechanically, your body demanding fuel for tomorrow's ordeal. As darkness falls, you collapse onto your reed mat, too tired to wash the limestone dust from your skin, too exhausted to care about the sand in your hair and clothes. Around you, 20 other men settle into the same exhausted stupor, their breathing gradually slowing as sleep takes them. Tomorrow will bring the same routine: wake before dawn, eat bread and onions, drag stones up the pyramid, suffer in the heat, collapse in exhaustion, and the day after that, and the day after that, until the pyramid is finished or you die in the attempt. This is your life as a pyramid builder. An existence so harsh and monotonous that survival itself is an achievement. Every stone you move, every step you climb, every breath you take in the desert heat is a victory against impossible odds. The Great Pyramid grows slowly, incrementally, built by the suffering of thousands of men like you. Each limestone block represents days of labor, gallons of sweat, and pain beyond description. But somehow, impossibly, the work continues, and the monument rises toward the sky in the darkness of the barracks, as exhaustion finally claims you. You can hear the Nile flowing in the distance, its waters bringing life to the desert. Tomorrow, it will still be there, as it always has been, as it always will be. And tomorrow, you will wake, eat your bread and onions, and return to the pyramid, because that's what pyramid builders do. They endure. The story of Kamwaset begins in a village along the Nile, where the river's annual flood brings life to the desert. He was born in the 37th year of Pharaoh Khufu's reign, when the Great Pyramid was already under construction, its lower courses rising like a mountain from the Giza Plateau. Kamwaset's father was a farmer, one of thousands who worked the fertile fields that bordered the Great River. During the inundation season, when the Nile overflowed its banks and flooded the farmland, these men became laborers, working on the pharaoh's monuments in exchange for food and shelter. When Kamwaset was 12 years old enough to carry water and assist with simple tasks, his father brought him to the pyramid site for the first time. The boy had never seen anything so massive, so impossible, so magnificent and terrifying. At the same time, "This is where we work when the river floods," his father explained, pointing to the growing pyramid. "This is how we serve the God King, how we ensure our place in the afterlife." Kamwaset spent that first season carrying water to the workers, learning the rhythms of the construction site, watching the endless procession of men dragging stones across the desert. He saw the skilled masons shaping blocks with copper tools, the engineers calculating angles with mysterious instruments, the overseers directing the work with shouts and gestures. But mostly, he saw the suffering. Men collapsed from heat and exhaustion, their bodies carried away like broken tools. Others were injured when ropes snapped or stones shifted unexpectedly, their cries echoing across the construction site. The work was dangerous, backbreaking, and seemingly endless. When Kamwaset turned 16, he joined a work gang officially, taking his place among the rope pullers who dragged the massive limestone blocks from quarry to pyramid. His first day nearly killed him, the weight of the ropes cutting into his shoulders, the desert heat overwhelming his young body. His father worked beside him, teaching him the techniques of survival, how to wrap the ropes to avoid injury, how to breathe during the heaviest pulls, how to conserve water during the hottest part of the day. These lessons were matters of life and death, passed down from experienced workers to newcomers. "The pyramid doesn't care if you live or die," his father told him during a brief rest break. "It only cares that the work continues. So you must care for yourself and for your gang brothers, because no one else will." Kemwaset learned to work in the rhythm of the gang, 20 men moving as one. Their strength combined to move loads that would be impossible for any individual. He learned to read the signs of heat exhaustion in his companions, to share his water ration when someone was struggling, to adjust his pace to match the weakest member of the team. The work was monotonous, the same tasks repeated day after day, season after season. But within that repetition, Kemwaset began to see the larger purpose. Each stone they moved was perfectly shaped, precisely positioned, part of a design so complex that only the God King and his architects understood it fully. The pyramid was more than just a tomb, more than just a monument to royal power. It was a machine for transformation, a device for ensuring the pharaoh's successful journey to the afterlife. Every stone was sacred, every angle was meaningful, every detail was crucial to the cosmic purpose of the structure. As years passed, Kemwaset became stronger, more skilled, more valuable to the construction project. He was promoted to assistant foreman, responsible for training new workers and coordinating the activities of multiple gangs. The work was still backbreaking, but now it carried additional responsibility. He watched the pyramid grow, layer by layer, course by course. What had once seemed impossible began to take shape. The massive structure rising toward the sky, like a mountain built by human hands. The engineering was flawless, each stone fitting perfectly with its neighbors. The angles precise to the smallest fraction. Kemwaset married Nefrit, the daughter of another pyramid worker, in a simple ceremony held during the inundation season, when work stopped for a few weeks. They had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and Kemwaset hoped that his boys might learn trades that would keep them away from the pyramid's deadly construction. But the pyramid project consumed everything, demanded everything. When the regular workers weren't sufficient to meet the construction schedule, additional men were conscripted from villages throughout Egypt. When materials ran short, quarries were opened in distant parts of the kingdom. When costs mounted, taxes were raised to fund the endless expense. The pyramid became the center of Kemwaset's world, the focus of his thoughts and dreams. He knew every stone in the lower courses, had personally helped move hundreds of blocks into position. He could navigate the maze of ramps and passages blindfolded, could estimate the weight of a stone block just by looking at it. In his 20th year of working on the pyramid, Kemwaset was promoted to chief foreman, responsible for coordinating the work of multiple gangs and ensuring that quotas were met. This promotion brought better food, a larger house in the workers' village, and the authority to make decisions about work assignments. But it also brought new pressures, new responsibilities, new dangers. When quotas weren't met, the chief foreman was held responsible. When accidents occurred, he had to answer to the royal overseers. When workers died, their families looked to him for explanations that didn't exist. The pyramid project had consumed 23 years of Kemwaset's life. When the final capstone was positioned at the summit, he stood with the other workers, watching as the golden pyramidion was hoisted into place, completing the structure that had dominated their existence for so long. The celebration was muted, exhausted. Too many friends had died during the construction. Too many bodies had been broken by the impossible demands of the work. The pyramid was magnificent, perfect, eternal, but its cost in human suffering was beyond calculation. Kemwaset was 39 years old when the Great Pyramid was completed, his body worn out by decades of back-breaking labor. His hands were permanently crippled from handling rough stone, his back bent from years of hauling heavy loads, his lungs damaged by limestone dust. He had given his life to the pyramid, and the pyramid had given him purpose, meaning, a place in something larger than himself. He had helped build a structure that would endure for thousands of years, a monument that would inspire awe and wonder long after his name was forgotten. In his final years, Kimwaset worked as a supervisor in the smaller pyramid projects that followed, training new generations of workers in the techniques he had mastered. He passed on the knowledge of rope work and stone moving, the skills of survival in the desert heat, the wisdom of working together as a team. He died at the age of 47, his body finally giving out after decades of abuse. His funeral was attended by hundreds of workers who had served under his supervision, men who respected his skill, his fairness, and his dedication to the impossible task of building pyramids. Kimwaset was buried in a simple tomb in the workers' cemetery, near the pyramid he had helped construct. His grave was marked with a modest stela that recorded his name and his service to the God King. It was a small memorial for a man who had devoted his life to something eternal. The Great Pyramid stands today, 45 centuries after Kimwaset's death, its limestone blocks still fitted with precision that amazes modern engineers. Tourists from around the world come to marvel at its construction, to wonder at the skill and determination of its builders. But few remember the men like Kimwaset, the thousands of workers who died to make the pyramid possible. Their names are forgotten, their stories lost, their suffering reduced to footnotes in history books. They lived hard lives, died young deaths, and left behind a monument that will outlast civilization itself. In the third year of Pharaoh Khufu's reign, something impossible happened near the pyramid construction site. It began with the disappearance of a work gang, 20 men who simply vanished during the night shift, leaving behind only their tools and a mystery that has never been solved. The gang had been assigned to work in the pyramid's internal chambers, hauling blocks through the narrow passages that would eventually become the king's chamber and the queen's chamber. It was dangerous work, performed in near darkness, with only oil lamps to provide light in the suffocating confines of the pyramid's interior. The foreman discovered their absence at dawn, when the workers failed to report for the morning shift. Their tools were found scattered throughout the grand gallery, the long sloping passage that leads to the heart of the pyramid. But the men themselves had vanished completely, as if they had simply walked into the stone walls and disappeared. A search was organized immediately, teams of workers combing every passage, every chamber, every nook and cranny of the pyramid's interior. They found nothing, no trace of the missing men, no indication of what might have happened to them. It was as if 20 human beings had simply ceased to exist. The royal architects examined the interior structures, checking for cave-ins or structural failures that might have trapped the workers. They found no damage, no blocked passages, no evidence of any kind of accident. The pyramid's interior was exactly as it had been designed, every stone in its proper place. The mystery deepened when workers reported strange sounds coming from within the pyramid. During the night shifts, voices, they claimed, speaking in languages they didn't recognize. Footsteps echoing through empty passages where no one was supposed to be walking. The sound of tools being used in chambers that had been sealed for months. The priests were consulted, and they declared that the pyramid was protected by powerful magic, that the missing workers had been chosen by the gods for some special purpose. They performed elaborate ceremonies, burning incense and chanting prayers. But the strange phenomena continued. More workers began to disappear, one here, two there, always during the night shifts, always without explanation. The remaining laborers became terrified, refusing to work in the pyramid's interior, claiming that it was cursed, that the gods were angry about something. Production on the pyramid slowed dramatically as workers refused assignments to the internal chambers. The royal overseers threatened punishment, but fear proved stronger than authority. Men would rather face beatings than risk disappearing into the pyramid's mysterious depths. The master architect, Hemunu, decided to investigate personally. He spent 3 nights inside the pyramid, accompanied by a small team of loyal assistants, trying to understand what was happening to the missing workers. On the third night, one of his assistants vanished, taken from a sealed chamber while Himunu slept. Just a few feet away, Himunu emerged from the pyramid, convinced that they were dealing with forces beyond human understanding. He reported to Pharaoh Khufu that the pyramid was indeed protected by divine power, that the missing workers had been selected for service in the afterlife, that their disappearance was a sign of the god's approval. The pharaoh, being a god himself, was not frightened by supernatural explanations. He ordered work to continue, but decreed that only volunteers would be assigned to the interior chambers, and that they would work in groups of 50 or more, never alone, never in small teams that might be vulnerable to whatever force was taking. The workers dot. The disappearances stopped as suddenly as they had begun. No more workers vanished. No more strange sounds were reported. No more mysterious phenomena disturbed the night shifts. The pyramid's interior became quiet, normal, safe again. But the mystery of the missing workers was never solved. Over the following months, a new pattern emerged. Workers reported finding tools in chambers where no one had been working, stones moved to positions where they hadn't been placed, passages cleared of debris that had been blocking them the day before. It was as if invisible workers were continuing the construction, laboring alongside the living crews. Some workers claimed to catch glimpses of their missing colleagues, ghostly figures working in the shadows, helping to position stones or clear rubble. These sightings were always brief, always uncertain, always at the edge of vision where reality blurs into imagination. The official explanation was that the missing workers had been chosen by the gods to continue their labor in death, that they were working to ensure the pyramid's completion from the spirit world. This explanation satisfied the priests, comforted the workers, and allowed construction to continue without further interruption. But questions remained, whispered in the workers' quarters during the quiet hours before dawn. What had really happened to the missing men? Where had they gone? Were they truly dead, or had they been taken somewhere else, somewhere beyond the reach of mortal understanding? Modern archaeologists have explored every inch of the Great Pyramid's interior, using advanced technology to map passages and chambers that the ancient builders never intended to be found. They have discovered hidden chambers, secret passages, and architectural features that serve no obvious purpose, but they have never found any trace of the missing workers. No bones, no tools, no evidence of their fate. The mystery remains as unsolved today as it was 4,000 years ago. A puzzle wrapped in the stones of the pyramid itself. The missing workers of the Great Pyramid remain lost to history, their fate unknown, their story untold. They have become part of the pyramid itself, absorbed into its stone and mortar, woven into its eternal mystery. They are the ultimate sacrifice to one of humanity's greatest achievements. Men who disappeared so that something immortal could be born, while Cain was set and his fellow workers suffered under the desert sun. Another world existed just a few miles away, a world of cool stone chambers, perfumed gardens, and luxurious comfort. This was the world of the royal court, where Pharaoh Khufu ruled as a living god, surrounded by nobles who lived lives of unimaginable privilege. Princess Nefertips was born into this world of luxury and power, the daughter of Pharaoh Khufu and one of his minor queens. Her birth was celebrated with feasts that lasted for weeks, gifts from across the known world, and prayers of thanksgiving in every temple throughout Egypt. She grew up in the royal palace at Memphis, a vast complex of gardens, courtyards, and chambers that covered several acres along the Nile. The palace was cooled by ingenious systems of channels and fountains, filled with the sound of flowing water and the scent of lotus blossoms. Nefertip slept on beds of ebony and gold, ate from plates of silver and precious stones, wore clothes of the finest linen, dyed with exotic pigments from distant lands. Her every need was anticipated by a staff of servants, who existed solely to ensure her comfort and happiness. But this luxury came with constraints that would be difficult for modern people to understand. Nefertits was never alone, never free to make her own choices, never permitted to experience the simple pleasures that even the poorest peasant might enjoy. She was a royal princess, and that title was both a blessing and a curse. Her education began when she was 4 years old, under the guidance of the finest tutors in Egypt. She learned to read and write in hieroglyphics, to speak the sacred language of the temples, to perform the complex rituals required of royal women. She studied mathematics, astronomy, and the religious texts that governed Egyptian society. Most importantly, she learned her place in the cosmic order. She was not just a person, but a goddess, a divine being whose every action affected the balance of the universe. This was an enormous responsibility for a child, a burden that shaped every aspect of her life. Nefertits was forbidden from leaving the palace grounds without elaborate escort, was not permitted to speak to commoners, and was restricted to a small circle of nobles and priests who were deemed suitable company for a divine princess. Her world was luxurious, but incredibly small, bounded by protocol and tradition. She watched the construction of her father's pyramid from the palace roof, seeing the tiny figures of workers moving like ants across the desert landscape. To her, they seemed barely human, creatures of a different species whose suffering was as distant and meaningless as the struggles of insects. The princess had no understanding of the harsh realities that shaped the lives of ordinary Egyptians. She had never been hungry, never been thirsty, never been hot or cold or uncomfortable in any way. Her food was prepared by skilled cooks. Her clothes were cleaned by armies of servants. Her every discomfort was immediately addressed. When Nefertiti was 12 years old, negotiations began for her marriage. Like all royal women, she would be married for political reasons, to strengthen alliances, secure borders, or consolidate power. Her own feelings, preferences, and desires were irrelevant to these calculations. The chosen bridegroom was her half-brother, Prince Kawab, the eldest son of Pharaoh Khufu and heir to the throne. This marriage between siblings was not unusual in royal families, where bloodline purity was considered essential to maintaining divine power. The wedding ceremony lasted for 40 days, with celebrations in every major city throughout Egypt. The cost of the festivities was enormous, funded by taxes collected from farmers and workers whose annual income was less than the price of a single piece of the bride's jewelry. After the wedding, Nefertiti moved to an even more luxurious wing of the palace, with her own staff of servants, her own gardens, and her own set of chambers, decorated with wall paintings depicting scenes from the afterlife. She was now not just a princess, but a future queen, destined to rule Egypt alongside her husband. Her daily routine was structured around religious observances, court ceremonies, and the endless protocol of royal life. She participated in temple rituals, received foreign dignitaries, and presided over festivals and celebrations. Every action was prescribed by tradition, every movement governed by ancient rules. Nefertiti had children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, who were raised by nurses and tutors rather than by their mother. She saw them for brief, formal visits, enough to ensure their health and proper development, but not enough to form the kind of emotional bonds that ordinary families take for granted. The princess lived through the completion of the Great Pyramid, attending the elaborate ceremonies that marked its finishing. She watched from a golden pavilion as the capstone was positioned, surrounded by nobles and priests who praised the achievement without any understanding of the human cost involved. From her privileged position, the pyramid was a thing of beauty and wonder, a testament to her father's divine power and Egypt's eternal greatness. She had no knowledge of the workers who had died in its construction, the families that had been destroyed by its demands, the suffering that had been required to build it. When Nefertiti was 35 years old, her husband died in a hunting accident, leaving her a widow with young children and enormous responsibilities. Under Egyptian law, she could serve as regent, until her eldest son came of age. But she could not rule in her own right. She spent her later years in increasing isolation, surrounded by luxury but deprived of purpose. Her children grew up and moved on to their own responsibilities. Her political influence waned, and she became more of a ceremonial figure than a real participant in governance. Nefertitips died at the age of 52, still young by modern standards, but elderly for ancient Egypt, even among the privileged classes. Her death was mourned throughout the kingdom, not necessarily because she was beloved, but because she represented continuity, tradition, and the divine order that Egyptians believed kept their world stable. She was buried in a tomb near the Great Pyramid, surrounded by everything she might need in the afterlife: furniture, jewelry, food, servants, statues, and texts to guide her through the dangers of death. Her burial chamber was decorated with paintings depicting her journey to the afterlife, her meeting with the gods, and her eternal life in paradise. The contrast between Princess Nefertitips and the pyramid workers could not have been more stark. She lived in comfort while they suffered in the desert heat. She ate delicacies while they gnawed on hard bread. She slept on silk while they rested on reed mats. Yet both were trapped by the same system, prisoners of a social order that gave them no real choices about their lives. The princess was as constrained by her privilege as the workers were by their poverty. She could not choose her husband, her career, her daily activities, or even her friendships. Her life was scripted by tradition, monitored by protocol, and judged by standards she had no role in creating. And so we leave ancient Egypt, where the desert sun burned relentlessly, where men moved stones that seemed impossible to lift, where the Nile flowed eternal and changeless through a land of unimaginable contrasts. These people, workers and royalty alike, lived lives bounded by duty, constrained by tradition, and devoted to purposes larger than their individual desires. They suffered and sacrificed, labored and endured, not for themselves, but for something they believed would last forever. The Great Pyramid still stands today, 45 centuries after Kamwaset's calloused hands helped guide its stones into place, 30 centuries after Princess Nefertitips watched its completion from her golden pavilion. It has outlasted empires, religions, and entire civilizations, a testament to human determination and the power of collective effort. As you drift off to sleep tonight, in your comfortable bed, in your climate-controlled room, remember the pyramid, builders laboring under the desert sun. Remember the missing workers who vanished into mystery, and the princess who lived in luxury but died in loneliness. Their struggles are over, their stories told, their monuments standing silent in the desert, but their legacy lives on, in the stones they moved, the mysteries they left behind, and the simple fact that they accomplished something impossible through sheer determination and unwavering persistence. The pyramids remind us that humans can achieve anything if they're willing to pay the price, if they're willing to work together, if they're willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Sleep well, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow brings, they pale in comparison to the daily battles fought by those who came before us, in that distant time, when building the impossible was just another day's work. Good night. 18th century lighthouse keepers. You are a lighthouse keeper on the coast of Cornwall. In the year 1743, the nearest village is 7 miles away, across rocky cliffs and treacherous paths that become impassable during winter storms. Your home is a stone tower, 60 feet tall, perched on a rocky outcrop that juts into the Atlantic Ocean. The waves crash against the rocks below. Day and night, a constant rhythm that becomes the soundtrack of your existence. Crash, retreat, endless and hypnotic. You wake before dawn, not because of any clock or bell, but because the lighthouse lamp requires constant attention. The flame burns whale oil, precious and expensive, and it must never be allowed to go out. Ships depend on this light, Sailors trust their lives to your vigilance. Your bed is a narrow cot, built into the curved wall of the lighthouse, with a thin mattress stuffed with straw that crackles every time you move. The stone walls are always damp, always cold. No matter how much wood you burn in the small fireplace below, you dress in the same woolen clothes you've worn for days, heavy and rough, but warm enough to keep you alive in the constant dampness. Your boots are leather, cracked and stained with salt water, but sturdy enough to grip the wet stone steps of the lighthouse. The climb to the lamp room is 73 steps, spiraling up through the hollow center of the tower. You've counted them thousands of times, your feet knowing each worn stone, each slight irregularity in the ancient masonry. Step, 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 around and around, until you reach the glass-walled chamber at the top. The lamp is a complex mechanism, more delicate than it appears. Polished mirrors focus the flame, magnifying its light and sending it far across the dark ocean. The glass lenses must be cleaned constantly, salt spray and soot from the burning oil, coating them with a film that dims the beacon. You tend the flame with careful precision, trimming the wick to ensure a steady burn, adding oil from the heavy jug you carry up those 73 steps, adjusting the mirrors to focus the light exactly where ships need to see it. This ritual takes an hour, every 6 hours. Throughout the day and night, between these duties, you have other tasks, but they're all variations on the same theme: maintenance, repair, preparation for the next storm. You check the supply of oil, counting the barrels stored in the lower chamber, calculating how long they'll last before the supply ship arrives. You inspect the tower itself, looking for cracks in the mortar, loose stones, damage from the previous night's waves. The lighthouse must stand against forces that would destroy any ordinary building. Winds that reach hurricane strength, waves that crash against the rocks with the force of artillery. Your food comes from the same supply ship that brings the oil, arriving every 2 weeks, if the weather permits, sometimes not for a month if storms make the approach too dangerous. Salt pork, hard-tacked biscuits, dried peas, and if you're lucky, a few potatoes that haven't rotted during the journey. You cook on a small stove in the middle chamber of the lighthouse, the same room where you eat, read, and spend the long hours. Between tending the lamp, the smoke rises through a chimney built into the tower's wall, but the smell of cooking mingles with the ever-present odor of whale oil and salt air. Water comes from rain, collected in barrels positioned around the lighthouse base, filtered through cloth to remove the worst of the debris. When the rain doesn't come, you drink sparingly, knowing that the next supply ship might be delayed by weather, equipment failure, or simple forgetfulness. The isolation is absolute, complete, crushing in its totality. You might go weeks without seeing another human being, months without having a real conversation. Your voice becomes rusty from disuse. Your social skills atrophy like unused muscles. You talk to yourself, of course, everyone does. Long conversations with imaginary companions, debates with people who exist only in your memory, arguments with the sea itself. The sound of your own voice becomes strange, unfamiliar, as if it belongs to someone else. The ocean is your only companion, and it's a demanding, dangerous friend. It provides the rhythm of your days, the background noise that replaces human conversation, the constant reminder of your vulnerability. The waves never stop, never rest, never tire of pounding against the rocks below. During storms, the lighthouse becomes a ship in a tempest, rocking slightly on its foundations, groaning under the assault of wind and water. You climb to the lamp, room through the worst weather, because that's when ships need the light most desperately. When lives depend on your faithfulness to duty, rain drives horizontally against the glass, so hard it sounds like handfuls of gravel thrown against the windows. Wind howls through every crack and crevice, carrying the salt spray 60 feet up to coat everything in a layer of corrosive mist. You clean the lamp glass again and again, wiping away the salt and moisture that would dim the beacon. your hands numb with cold, your clothes soaked despite the oiled cloth you wear over them. The flame flickers in the wind that finds its way through gaps you never knew existed. Between storms, the work continues at a gentler pace, but it never stops. You paint the lighthouse walls with whitewash mixed from lime and salt water, making the tower visible to ships during daylight hours. The paint lasts only months before the salt air and constant moisture require another coating. You repair nets and ropes, not for fishing, but for the complex system of pulleys and lines used to hoist supplies from boats that can't dock at the rocky shore. Everything must be hauled up by hand, barrel by barrel, sack by sack, including the precious oil that keeps the light burning. The lens system requires constant attention, delicate adjustments to keep the light focused properly, careful cleaning of each piece of glass and metal. One misaligned mirror, one dirty lens, one moment of carelessness, and ships might miss the warning. Sailors might die on the rocks below. You keep a logbook, recording the weather, the condition of the light, the ships that pass during your watch. Your handwriting becomes cramped and awkward. Your vocabulary shrinks to the essential terms of wind, weather, and sea conditions. Page after page of the same observations, the same routine entries. Light burning steady, wind from the southwest, moderate seas, day after day, week after week. The same careful notations that might be read by shipping inspectors, insurance investigators, or the families of sailors who never made it home. Night watches are the hardest, climbing those 73 steps, every few hours, checking the flame by lantern light, adjusting the wick by feel when your fingers are too cold to work properly. The darkness beyond the lighthouse is complete, absolute, broken only by the beam of light that sweeps across the water. You listen for ships in distress, the sound of wood breaking against rocks, voices calling for help across the water. Sometimes you hear these things, sometimes they're real, sometimes they're products of isolation and exhaustion, playing tricks on your mind. Sleep comes in fragments, 2 or 3 hours at a time, always interrupted by the need to tend the light. You develop the ability to wake at precise intervals, your body clock calibrated to the rhythm of lighthouse keeping. But real rest becomes a distant memory. The supply ship, when it finally arrives, brings more than food and oil. It brings news from the outside world, letters from family you haven't seen in years, newspapers that are weeks old but feel fresh as morning bread. The captain or crew might stay for an hour, sharing gossip and rumors, before heading back to civilization. These brief contacts with humanity are precious beyond measure, but they also highlight the crushing loneliness of your daily existence. When the ship disappears over the horizon, you're alone again, more alone than before, because you've been reminded of what you're missing. Winter is the worst season. When storms arrive, one after another, waves crash higher against the lighthouse, and supply ships can't make the dangerous approach to your rocky perch. You ration food and oil, conserving both for emergencies that seem always about to arrive. The cold seeps through the stone walls, through your clothes, into your bones. You burn driftwood when you can find it, but fuel is always scarce, always precious. You learn to live with cold that would drive ordinary people to desperation. Cold that makes every movement an effort. Spring brings relief. Longer days, calmer seas, the return of supply ships with fresh provisions. But it also brings the realization that you've survived another year, that the cycle is beginning again, that this life of isolation and routine will continue indefinitely. You measure time not in hours or days, but in the rhythm of tending the light, the cycle of storms and calm weather, the arrival and departure of supply ships. Seasons blend together, years pass without significant change, and you become as permanent as the lighthouse itself. Some keepers go mad, talking to imaginary companions, seeing ships that aren't there, abandoning their posts to walk into the sea. Others adapt, finding peace in the solitude, developing an almost mystical connection with the ocean and the rhythm of the tides. You fall somewhere between these extremes, neither mad nor at peace, but persistent, dutiful, faithful to the simple task that defines your existence. Keep the light burning, warn the ships, save the sailors. It's not a glamorous calling, but it's essential, and that knowledge sustains you through the darkest nights. The lighthouse beam sweeps across the water, again and again, hypnotic and endless. Light, darkness, the eternal rhythm that marks your days and nights. You become part of this rhythm, part of the lighthouse itself. As permanent and reliable as the stone tower that houses the flame, your life is measured not in achievements or adventures, but in ships that pass safely, sailors who make it home, families that aren't destroyed by shipwreck and loss. These victories are invisible, uncounted, unremembered, but they're real, and they matter in the darkness of the lighthouse chamber. As the lamp burns steady and the waves crash against the rocks below, you perform your simple, vital duty. You keep the light burning. You maintain the beacon. You hold back the darkness that would claim ships and lives and dreams. Tomorrow will bring the same routine, the same challenges, the same crushing solitude. But tonight, the light burns bright, the ships pass safely, and somewhere across the dark ocean, sailors give thanks to the unknown keeper who guides them home. The story of Edmund Hartwell begins in the fishing village of St. Ives, where he was born in 1718 to a family that had worked the sea for generations. His father was a fisherman, his brothers were fishermen, and everyone expected Edmund to follow the same path, hauling nets and setting traps along the dangerous Cornish coast. But Edmund was different, drawn not to the sea itself, but to the lights that guided ships safely through treacherous waters. As a boy, he would climb the cliffs above the village, watching the lighthouse beacons that marked the safe passages between the rocks, fascinated by their steady, faithful glow. When Edmund was 16, a terrible storm struck the coast, driving 3 fishing boats onto the rocks below Pendine Lighthouse. The keeper, drunk on smuggled brandy, had let the light go out, and 12 men died in the dark waters, including Edmund's eldest brother. The tragedy changed Edmund's life, giving him a purpose beyond the simple struggle for survival that consumed most men in his village. He applied to the Trinity House Corporation, the organization responsible for maintaining lighthouses around the British coast, offering to serve as an assistant keeper. His first assignment was Belrock Lighthouse, a new construction built on a treacherous reef 12 miles off the Scottish coast. The lighthouse was considered a marvel of engineering, rising from rocks that were completely submerged at high tide. Accessible only during calm weather and low water, Edmund spent 3 years at Belrock, learning the intricate skills of lighthouse keeping under the guidance of Robert Stevenson, the engineer who had designed the impossible structure. He learned to tend the oil lamps, clean the complex lens systems, and maintain equipment that ships' lives depended upon. But Belrock was not a solitary posting. It was staffed by teams of keepers who worked in shifts, with regular relief and supply boats connecting them to the mainland. Edmund learned the technical skills of his trade, but he didn't yet understand the true cost of lighthouse keeping. The crushing isolation of solo postings. In 1742, at the age of 24, Edmund was assigned to Longship's Lighthouse, an isolated station on a rocky outcrop off the tip of Cornwall. This was a single keeper, posting responsible for 1 man, supplied by boat when weather permitted, and offering a level of isolation that few human beings could endure. The previous keeper had abandoned his post after 6 months, found wandering the mainland in a state of complete mental breakdown. The one before that had simply disappeared, leaving behind only his logbook with increasingly erratic entries, describing conversations with mermaids and visits from long-dead sailors. Edmund approached his new assignment with confidence born of ignorance. He had mastered the technical aspects of lighthouse keeping. He was physically strong and mentally stable, and he believed that he could handle anything the sea might throw at him. He was wrong about the last part. Longship's lighthouse stood 40 feet above the high water mark, built on a foundation of massive stone blocks that had been quarried on the mainland and ferried to the site during rare periods of calm weather. The lighthouse itself was 30 feet in diameter at the base, tapering to 20 feet at the lamp room, with walls thick enough to withstand the worst storms the Atlantic could produce. Edmund's living quarters occupied the middle sections of the tower, a sleeping chamber barely 8 feet across, a combined kitchen and sitting room with a table built into the curved wall, and storage areas for the oil, food, and equipment that sustained his isolated existence. The lamp room at the top of the tower was his primary workplace, a circular chamber surrounded by windows that provided a 360-degree view of the ocean. The light itself was a sophisticated mechanism, with oil-burning lamps focused by polished mirrors and magnified by carefully ground lenses that sent the beacon 20 miles across the dark water. Edmund's first week at Longships passed smoothly, almost pleasantly. The weather was calm, the lamp functioned perfectly, and he enjoyed the spectacular views from the tower's height. He wrote optimistic letters to his family, describing the lighthouse as a peaceful retreat from the noise and chaos of village life. But as weeks turned into months, the reality of his situation began to sink in. The isolation was not peaceful, it was crushing, a weight that pressed down on his mind and spirit with increasing force. He began to understand why his predecessors had failed, why lighthouse keeping was considered one of the most difficult and dangerous occupations in the world. The work itself was manageable, even monotonous: tend the lamp every few hours, clean the lenses daily, maintain the equipment, record weather observations in the logbook. But the solitude was devastating, a slow poison that affected his ability to think clearly, to remember details, to maintain his sanity. Edmund began talking to himself, at first just muttering while he worked, then carrying on elaborate conversations with imaginary companions. He named the seabirds that nested on the rocks below, creating personalities and relationships for creatures that showed no interest in human contact. The supply boat came every 2 weeks, weather permitting, bringing food, oil, letters, and newspapers. Edmund looked forward to these visits with desperate intensity, counting the days until the boat was due, watching the horizon for hours when the weather was suitable for landing. But winter brought storms that kept the supply boat away for 6 weeks, then 8, then 10. Edmund's food ran low, then ran out completely. He survived on seaweed and the occasional fish he could catch from the lighthouse platform, drinking rainwater collected in every available container. The isolation during this period was absolute, complete, maddening in its totality. Edmund lost track of time, forgot what day it was, sometimes forgot his own name. He wrote in his logbook with increasing desperation, filling pages with observations about weather that existed only in his imagination. Ships that weren't there, conversations with people who had never existed. When the supply boat finally arrived, the crew found Edmund in a state of near collapse, physically weakened by hunger and mentally damaged by months of complete solitude. They considered replacing him immediately, but Edmund begged for another chance, promising to handle the isolation better, to maintain his sanity through discipline and routine. The Trinity House supervisors decided to give him one more opportunity, partly because finding replacement keepers was difficult, partly because Edmund's technical skills were excellent when he wasn't suffering from isolation-induced breakdown. They provided him with books, writing materials, and a chess set to help combat the loneliness. Edmund returned to Longships with new determination, armed with strategies for maintaining his mental health during the long periods of isolation. He established rigid routines for every aspect of his life, from the time he woke to the order in which he performed his duties, creating structure that helped anchor his mind when solitude threatened to set it adrift. He read voraciously, working through the small library of books provided by Trinity House, then reading them again, memorizing passages, creating elaborate mental discussions about literature, philosophy, and natural science. He played chess against himself, keeping careful records of each game, developing strategies and counter-strategies that occupied hours of mental energy. Most importantly, he learned to embrace the rhythm of the lighthouse itself, the regular cycle of tending the lamp, cleaning the lenses, maintaining the equipment. This routine became a kind of meditation, a way of staying connected to his purpose, even when his mind began to wander into dangerous territory. Edmund served at Longship's Lighthouse for 12 years, becoming one of the longest-serving solo keepers in Trinity House history. He survived storms that damaged the lighthouse structure, supply interruptions that lasted months, and periods of isolation that would have broken most men. He became legendary among other lighthouse keepers for his reliability, his technical skill, and his ability to endure conditions that had driven dozens of other men to madness or suicide. Ship's captains knew they could depend on Longship's light, that Edmund Hartwell would keep the beacon burning no matter what challenges he faced. But the cost of this service was enormous, measured not in money but in human connection, social development, and mental stability. Edmund aged rapidly during his years at Longships, his hair turning white, his face becoming lined and weathered, his hands developing a permanent tremor from the constant stress of isolation. When he finally retired at the age of 48, Edmund was a broken man, unable to function in normal society, incapable of maintaining relationships or holding ordinary conversations. He had given his life to the lighthouse service, and the service had consumed everything that made him human, except his technical competence and unwavering sense of duty. Edmund spent his final years in a cottage provided by Trinity House, tending a small garden and receiving a modest pension in recognition of his service. He rarely spoke to visitors, preferring the company of his books and memories to the confusing demands of human interaction. He died in 1771, alone in his cottage, found 3 days later by a neighbor who had noticed that his daily walk to the village shop had stopped. His funeral was attended by dozens of lighthouse keepers, ships, officers, and Trinity House officials who recognized his sacrifice, his dedication, and his crucial role in saving countless lives. Edmund Hartwell's legacy was not fame or fortune, but the simple fact that for 12 years, Longship's light had never failed, never gone dark, never betrayed the trust of sailors who depended on its beacon. He had given his sanity, his health, and ultimately his life to ensure that ships could navigate safely through one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the world. His story represents the hidden cost of maritime safety, the human price, paid by men who chose isolation and hardship so that others could travel safely across the sea. Edmund was one of hundreds of lighthouse keepers who made similar sacrifices, men whose names are forgotten but whose service made modern navigation possible. In the summer of 1754, something extraordinary happened at Eddystone Lighthouse, a station built on a dangerous reef 14 miles off the Plymouth coast. It began with reports from passing ships of a light that wasn't supposed to exist, a second beacon that appeared beside the official lighthouse lamp, burning with an eerie, greenish glow. The keeper at Eddystone was James Walker, an experienced man who had tended lighthouses for 15 years without incident. His reports to Trinity House described a mysterious light in careful, measured language, but his private letters to his family revealed growing fear and confusion about phenomena he couldn't explain. The second light appeared only on certain nights, usually during calm weather when the sea was smooth and the official lamp burned steady and bright. It would materialize in the lamp room itself, hovering near the windows, casting shadows that moved independently of any visible flame. Walker initially dismissed the light as some kind of optical illusion, perhaps caused by reflections from the polished mirrors that focused the official beacon, but the phenomenon persisted, night after night, becoming brighter and more distinct, until it was clearly visible to ships passing the lighthouse. Ship captains reported seeing two lights at Eddystone, which created dangerous confusion about the lighthouse's position and the location of the reef. Some sailors tried to navigate by the mysterious second light, nearly driving their vessels onto the rocks when they discovered that the green beacon didn't correspond to any known landmark. Trinity House sent investigators to examine the lighthouse, checking for equipment malfunctions, structural problems, or fraud on Walker's part. They found nothing wrong with the lamp, the mirrors, or the building itself. The lighthouse was functioning perfectly, yet the second light continued to appear. The investigators spent 3 nights at Eddystone, witnessing the phenomenon firsthand. They described a light that seemed to have no source, no fuel, no physical mechanism to explain its existence. It appeared suddenly, burned steadily for several hours, then vanished just as mysteriously, leaving no trace of its presence. Walker began keeping detailed records of the mysterious light, noting the exact times of its appearance, the weather conditions, the phase of the moon, and any other factors that might explain the phenomenon. His logbook became filled with increasingly desperate attempts to find rational explanations for something that defied understanding. The strange events escalated when Walker reported hearing voices in the lamp room during the appearances of the second light. The voices spoke in languages he didn't recognize, using words that sounded vaguely nautical but made no sense in English. Sometimes the voices seemed to be giving navigation instructions. Other times they appeared to be calling for help. Other lighthouse keepers along the coast began reporting similar phenomena at their own stations. Mysterious lights appeared at Wolf Rock, Longships, and Starpoint lighthouses, always accompanied by the same inexplicable voices, the same eerie green glow, the same confusion among passing ships. The Trinity House board was facing a crisis that threatened the entire lighthouse system. If sailors couldn't trust the beacons, if mysterious lights were causing navigation errors, if keepers were reporting supernatural phenomena, the credibility of the service would be destroyed. A special commission was formed to investigate the mysterious lights, composed of naval officers, engineers, and natural philosophers who approached the problem with scientific skepticism. They installed additional equipment at affected lighthouses, used instruments to measure temperature and atmospheric pressure, and sought rational explanations for the unexplained phenomena. The Commission's findings were inconclusive but disturbing. They confirmed that the mysterious lights were real, visible to multiple observers, and potentially dangerous to navigation. But they found no evidence of fraud, equipment malfunction, or natural phenomena that could account for the appearances. Dr. William Herschel, the astronomer, proposed that the lights might be caused by some unknown form of atmospheric electricity, similar to the aurora borealis, but occurring at lower latitudes. This theory provided a scientific framework for understanding the phenomena, even if it didn't explain the specific details of their appearance. The Royal Navy issued new navigation instructions, warning ships about unreliable lights near certain lighthouses, advising captains to verify beacon positions using traditional navigation methods rather than trusting sight alone. This reduced the immediate danger to shipping, but it undermined confidence in the lighthouse system. As months passed, the mysterious lights began appearing less frequently, then sporadically, then not at all. By the end of 1754, the phenomena had stopped completely, leaving only the detailed records kept by lighthouse keepers and the lingering questions about what had caused them. Walker continued his service at Eddystone for 7 more years, but he was never the same after his encounters with the mysterious light. He became withdrawn, obsessive about his duties, constantly checking and rechecking the lamp to ensure that it was functioning normally. His final logbook entries, written shortly before his retirement, contained references to visitors who came to the lighthouse on dark nights, though he never specified who these visitors were or what they wanted. He died in 1763, taking his secrets with him to the grave. Modern researchers have proposed various explanations for the mysterious lighthouse phenomena of 1754: mass hallucination caused by isolation and stress, optical illusions created by unusual atmospheric conditions, or hoaxes perpetrated by lighthouse keepers seeking attention or sympathy. But none of these explanations account for all the evidence, all the detailed reports from multiple reliable witnesses, all the documented effects on shipping and navigation. The mystery of the green lights remains unsolved, one of the strangest episodes in the history of British lighthouses. The official Trinity House records contain careful documentation of the entire affair, filed away in archives that few researchers ever examine. The reports describe phenomena that challenge our understanding of the natural world, events that seem impossible but were witnessed by dozens of credible observers. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the mystery is not what happened, but what it suggests about the isolation and stress endured by lighthouse keepers. If the mysterious lights were hallucinations, what does that say about the mental state of the men who tended these lonely outposts? The lighthouse keepers of the 18th century lived lives so isolated, so divorced from normal human contact, that the boundary between reality and imagination became blurred. They saw things that weren't there, heard voices that didn't exist, experienced phenomena that had no basis in the physical world. Or perhaps they saw things that were there, but invisible to the rest of us, phenomena that exist at the edges of human perception, accessible only to men whose minds had been altered by years of solitude and constant vigilance. The mystery of the green lights remains one of the most fascinating unsolved puzzles in maritime history. While Edmund Hartwell tended his lonely beacon at Longship's Lighthouse, life at the Trinity House headquarters in London moved at a completely different pace, governed by different priorities, shaped by different concerns. This was a world of comfortable offices, regular meals, and human company, where the isolation of lighthouse keeping was an abstract concept rather than a lived reality. Admiral Sir Charles Douglas commanded the Trinity House Corporation from his oak-paneled office overlooking the Thames, surrounded by charts, reports, and correspondence from lighthouse stations around the British coast. He was responsible for the safety of maritime commerce, the lives of thousands of sailors, and the careers of hundreds of lighthouse keepers whom he had never met. Douglas had served in the Royal Navy for 30 years before accepting his position with Trinity House, commanding ships in battles across the world's oceans. He understood navigation, weather, and the dangers faced by vessels at sea, but he had never spent a single night alone in a lighthouse, never experienced the crushing isolation that defined his keepers' lives. His daily routine began with morning reports from his staff, summaries of weather conditions, shipping movements, and maintenance requirements at lighthouses throughout his jurisdiction. These reports reduced human suffering to statistical abstractions. Keeper requests additional oil supplies, light functioning normally despite severe weather. Replacement keeper required due to previous incumbents' incapacitation. The Admiral reviewed these reports with professional detachment, making decisions that affected men's lives without considering the human cost of his choices. When a lighthouse keeper requested relief due to mental exhaustion, Douglas saw only operational requirements and budget constraints, not the desperate plea of a man approaching psychological breakdown. His office was a shrine to maritime tradition, filled with models of ships, paintings of naval battles, and instruments used for navigation and surveying. The walls were lined with books on naval history, engineering, and administration, representing a theoretical knowledge of the sea that contrasted sharply with the practical, visceral understanding possessed by his lighthouse keepers. Douglas ate well, slept in a comfortable bed, and enjoyed the company of his wife, children, and colleagues. His social calendar was filled with dinners, meetings, and official ceremonies, a constant round of human interaction that he took for granted. He had no conception of what it meant to go weeks without speaking to another person, months without seeing another human face. The Trinity House budget meetings were exercises in cost-cutting and efficiency, where human welfare was balanced against financial constraints. Douglas argued for reduced rations at isolated stations, longer periods between supply runs, and lower wages for lighthouse keepers, justifying these economies as necessary for maintaining the overall system. When lighthouse keepers died in service, Douglas wrote formal letters of condolence to their families, expressing sympathy in carefully chosen phrases that revealed no personal understanding of their loss. He recommended modest pensions for widows, small gratuities for orphaned children, and replacement keepers who would accept the same dangerous conditions for the same inadequate pay. The Admiral's knowledge of lighthouse operations came from reports and statistics, not from personal experience. He knew that Longship's lighthouse consumed a certain quantity of oil per month, required specific maintenance procedures, and presented particular navigational challenges. But he had never climbed those 73 steps, never felt the spray of salt water 60 feet above the sea, never experienced the soul-crushing loneliness of a solo posting. His decisions were made in comfortable committee rooms, based on paper reports and budget projections, implemented by subordinates who transmitted his orders through official channels. The human consequences of these decisions were invisible to him, filtered through layers of bureaucracy that sanitized the harsh realities of lighthouse life. Douglas genuinely believed that he was serving the greater good, protecting British commerce, and saving sailors' lives through efficient administration of the lighthouse system. He took pride in the reduced number of shipwrecks, the improved reliability of navigation aids, and the expansion of lighthouse coverage along dangerous coasts. But he never understood the price paid by men like Edmund Hartwell, the human cost of the system he administered. The Admiral saw lighthouse keepers as cogs in a machine, interchangeable parts that could be replaced when they broke down, rather than as individual human beings deserving of consideration and care. His wife, Lady Margaret Douglas, occasionally hosted social events for Trinity House officers and their families. Elegant dinners where the conversation touched lightly on lighthouse operations. The ladies would express sympathy for the poor lighthouse keepers, wondering aloud how anyone could endure such isolation, but their concern was theoretical, disconnected from any real understanding of the conditions they were discussing. The contrast between the Admiral's comfortable life and the existence of his lighthouse keepers could not have been more stark. He worked in heated offices, while they shivered in stone towers. He enjoyed elaborate meals while they subsisted on hardtack and salt pork. He slept peacefully while they maintained vigilant watch through the darkest nights. When the Admiral retired, at the age of 62, he was honored with a knighthood, a generous pension, and the gratitude of the maritime community for his service to navigation safety. He spent his final years writing memoirs that described his administrative achievements without mentioning the lighthouse keepers whose sacrifices had made those achievements possible. Douglas died in his comfortable London home in 1776, surrounded by family and friends, tended by skilled physicians, mourned by colleagues who respected his professional accomplishments. His funeral was attended by naval officers, government officials, and Trinity House administrators who praised his dedication to maritime safety. But the lighthouse keepers he had commanded were not represented at his funeral, could not attend, even if they had been invited, because they were trapped in their isolated towers, tending their lonely beacons, maintaining the system that Douglas had created but never truly understood. The Admiral's legacy was a more efficient, cost-effective lighthouse service that saved countless lives and supported British maritime commerce. But this legacy was built on the backs of men who were treated as expendable resources, whose suffering was considered an acceptable cost of doing business, whose humanity was sacrificed to administrative efficiency. Lady Margaret Douglas inherited her husband's estate and lived comfortably on his pension for 20 years after his death. She occasionally received letters from Trinity House, requesting charitable contributions for the families of lighthouse keepers who had died in service, and she would send modest amounts while wondering vaguely about the circumstances that created such need. The contrast between the Douglas family's prosperity and the poverty of lighthouse keepers' families was typical of the social divisions that characterized 18th century Britain. Those who made decisions lived in comfort, while those who implemented them suffered in isolation. And the gulf between these two worlds was so vast that meaningful communication was impossible. Admiral Douglas and Edmund Hartwell lived in the same era, worked for the same organization, and served the same cause. But they might as well have existed on different planets. One commanded from comfort, the other endured in isolation, and neither truly understood the other's experience. And so we leave the lighthouse keepers, standing their eternal watch on rocky outcrops and isolated reefs, where the waves never rest, and the light never fails. And human endurance is tested against forces that would break ordinary men. These solitary guardians lived lives of unimaginable isolation, month after month, year after year, maintaining the beacons that guided ships safely through treacherous waters. They sacrificed their sanity, their health, their connection to humanity itself, so that sailors they would never meet could find their way home. The lighthouse beam still sweeps across the water. Even now, centuries after Edmund Hartwell climbed those 73 steps for the last time. Modern technology has replaced the whale oil lamps and polished mirrors, but the principle remains the same. Someone must tend the light, someone must keep the beacon burning, someone must hold back the darkness as you drift off to sleep tonight. In your warm bed, surrounded by the sounds of human activity, remember the lighthouse keepers in their stone towers, listening to nothing but the crash of waves and the whisper of wind. Remember Edmund Hartwell, counting his steps in the darkness, cleaning salt spray from the lenses, keeping faith with sailors he would never see. Their watches ended, their lights extinguished, their names forgotten by all but the most dedicated historians. But their legacy lives on, in every ship that reaches port safely, every family that isn't destroyed by maritime tragedy, every sailor who trusts his life to the lights that pierce the darkness. The ocean remembers them, in the rhythm of waves, against the rocks, in the cry of seabirds circling their towers, in the eternal dance of light and shadow that plays across the water. They became part of the sea itself, as permanent and reliable as the tides, as essential as the wind. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere, lighthouse keepers still stand watch, still tend their beacons, still hold back the darkness that would claim ships and lives and dreams. Their vigil continues, as it always has, as it always will, for as long as humans venture onto the vast and dangerous sea. Good night, Victorian domestic servants. You are a housemaid in a grand Victorian mansion. In the year 1875, it's 4:30 in the morning, and the house is still dark, still quiet, still wrapped in the deep silence that exists only in the hours before dawn. Your bed is a narrow iron frame, tucked into a tiny room in the servants' quarters. High up in the attic where the roof slopes so low you can barely stand upright, the mattress is thin, filled with horsehair that pokes through the worn fabric, and your single blanket is rough wool that scratches against your skin. You wake without an alarm clock, because your body has learned the rhythm of service, the precise timing that governs every moment of your existence. 4:30 every morning, without fail, because the house must be ready before the family wakes, before they see any evidence of the work that maintains their comfort. You dress quickly in the dark, pulling on the same black dress you wear every day, the same white apron that must be spotless, the same cap that covers your hair completely. Your hands are already rough and red from yesterday's work, your fingernails broken from scrubbing and cleaning, your back aching from hours of bending over wash basins and coal scuttles. The servants' stairs are narrow and steep, winding down through the hidden passages that allow staff to move through the house without being seen by the family. Your feet know every creaking board, every worn step, every place where the banister wobbles slightly under your weight. You descend through floors of sleeping luxury, past bedrooms where the family rests on feather mattresses, under silk coverlet, in rooms heated by fires that burn all night. Their comfort is maintained by your labor, their rest made possible by your wakefulness, their cleanliness purchased with your exhaustion. The kitchen is your first destination, where Mrs. Pemberton, the cook, already has the range burning and water heating for the day's endless requirements. She nods at you without speaking, because words are wasted at this hour, because there's too much work and too little time for conversation. Your first task is lighting the fires throughout the house. Carrying coal scuttles up those same narrow stairs, kneeling on cold hearths to lay kindling and arrange logs. The coal dust blackens your hands and stains your apron, no matter how carefully you work, and the smoke makes your eyes water and your throat burn. Room by room, you move through the sleeping house, lighting fires that will warm the family when they wake, ensuring that their comfort begins the moment they open their eyes. The drawing room, the morning room, the dining room, the master's study, each requiring the same careful ritual of cleaning yesterday's ashes, laying fresh kindling, coaxing flames to life. The coal is heavy, the scuttles are awkward, and the stairs seem endless when you're carrying load after load from the cellar to the upper floors. Your arms ache, your back protests, and your legs tremble with fatigue, but the work must be done, because cold rooms would mean complaints, and complaints would mean dismissal. After the fires comes the sweeping, room by room, carpet by carpet, picking up every speck of dust, every fallen leaf, every tiny piece of debris that might offend the family's eyes. You use a carpet sweeper for the main areas, but the corners require hands and knees, careful attention to baseboards and furniture legs. The carpets are thick and heavy, Persian rugs worth more than you'll earn in a lifetime, and they must be cleaned with religious devotion. Every thread matters, every pattern must be preserved, every stain removed before it can set permanently. You crawl across these expensive surfaces, brushing and wiping and polishing, your knees grinding against the floor beneath. Dusting comes next, every surface in every room, from the highest picture frames to the lowest table legs. You carry a basket of cloths and polishes, moving methodically through the house, wiping down furniture that costs more than your family's cottage, handling delicate ornaments worth more than you'll see in a year. The family's possessions are beautiful, fragile, and completely beyond your reach. You clean silver candlesticks that gleam like moonlight, dust porcelain figurines painted with exquisite detail, polish mahogany tables that reflect your tired face like dark mirrors. But you can never own such things, never enjoy their beauty, only maintain them for others. Every ornament must be lifted, dusted underneath, replaced exactly in its original position. The family notices when things are moved, when the arrangement of their possessions is disturbed even slightly. You develop an eye for precise placement, memorizing the exact angle of every picture frame, the specific position of every decorative object. Windows require daily attention, inside and outside, polished until they're invisible, until the family can look through them without seeing streaks or spots, or any evidence that glass exists between them and the world. You carry buckets of water up and down stairs, mix cleaning solutions that sting your hands, wipe and polish until your arms ache. The morning routine includes preparing the family's breakfast, laying the table with perfect precision, ensuring that every fork is properly aligned, every napkin folded exactly right, every piece of china positioned according to rules you've memorized but don't fully understand. The dining room must look effortless, natural, as if the meal has appeared by magic. You work in silence, always in silence, because servants are supposed to be invisible, present but unnoticed, like furniture that moves and cleans and serves. but never speaks unless spoken to. Your thoughts become your only company, your inner voice, the only conversation you're allowed to have. The family wakes around 8 o'clock, and suddenly the house fills with voices. Footsteps, the rustle of expensive clothing, the clink of silverware against china. You retreat to the servants' areas, continuing your work, but staying out of sight, like a shadow that maintains the household from the margins. Breakfast service requires precise timing. Hot food served at exactly the right temperature, coffee poured without spilling, newspapers ironed and folded to remove wrinkles from the night's dampness. Every detail matters, every mistake is noticed, every imperfection reflects on your competence and character. After breakfast comes the real work of the day, cleaning the family's private rooms, making beds with military precision, emptying chamber pots with as much dignity as you can manage, washing and pressing clothes that cost more than you earn in months. The master bedroom is a shrine to luxury. You'll never experience silk wallpaper, crystal chandeliers, Persian carpets, furniture inlaid with mother of pearl and decorated with gold leaf. You clean this room with the reverence of a worshipper in a cathedral, touching objects you could never afford, maintaining beauty you can admire but never possess. Making the bed is an art form that requires 20 minutes of careful work. The sheets must be stretched tight enough to bounce a coin, the coverlet arranged without wrinkles, the pillows plumped and positioned exactly right. Every morning, the same ritual, the same attention to detail, the same pursuit of invisible perfection. The family's clothing requires constant attention, washing, pressing, mending, arranging in wardrobes with systematic precision. Dresses worth hundreds of pounds must be brushed and hung properly. Shoes that cost more than your annual wages must be cleaned and polished to mirror brightness. You handle these expensive garments with the care they deserve, but also with the knowledge that they represent a world you'll never enter. The lady of the house owns more dresses than you'll wear in your lifetime, more jewelry than you'll ever see outside this house, more luxury than you can imagine. Laundry is a weekly ordeal that begins before dawn and continues past midnight. Tubs of boiling water, harsh soaps that crack your hands, clothes that must be scrubbed by hand until every stain disappears. The family's linens are white, pure white, and they must stay that way despite the coal dust, food stains, and general dirt of daily life. Your hands are constantly wet, constantly cold, constantly wrinkled from water and harsh chemicals. The skin cracks and bleeds, but you can't wear gloves because they interfere with the careful handling required for delicate fabrics. You develop permanent calluses, scars that mark you as surely as any brand. The ironing takes hours, each piece of clothing pressed with meticulous care, every wrinkle eliminated, every seam straightened to perfection. The irons are heavy, heated on the range, and they must be the right temperature. Hot enough to smooth fabric, but not so hot they scorch delicate materials. Meal preparation consumes the middle of every day. Complex dishes that require hours of preparation, precise timing, artistic presentation. You assist the cook with endless tasks, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, carrying dishes up and down those narrow stairs, serving meals with practiced invisibility. The family eats foods you've never tasted, prepared with ingredients you've never seen, served on dishes worth more than your family earns in a year. You watch them consume in minutes what took hours to prepare, waste food that would feed your family for days, complain about details you can't even perceive. Afternoon tea is a ritual of precision, with specific requirements for every element: the temperature of the water, the strength of the tea, the arrangement of sandwiches and cakes, the polishing of silver that gleams like captured sunlight. Every detail is noticed, every mistake remembered, every success taken for granted. Dinner is the day's greatest challenge, a formal meal that requires hours of preparation and flawless execution. Multiple courses, each with specific service requirements. Wines that must be decanted and served at precise temperatures. Table settings that follow rules as complex as any scientific formula. You move through the dining room like a ghost, refilling glasses, removing plates, serving courses, all while remaining completely invisible to the family's conversation. You hear their discussions of politics, business, social events, but you're not supposed to listen, not supposed to understand, not supposed to have opinions about their world. Evening brings the cleaning of the day's damage. Dishes washed, silver polished, tables wiped, floors swept, everything restored to perfection for tomorrow's repetition. The dining room must look as if no meal was ever served, as if the family's comfort requires no effort, no time, no human cost. Your day ends around 10 o'clock, when the family retires and the house settles into quiet. You climb those narrow stairs one final time, your body aching with exhaustion, your hands cracked and bleeding, your feet swollen from 16 hours of constant movement in your tiny attic room. You collapse onto that narrow bed, too tired to undress properly, too exhausted to think about tomorrow's identical routine. Around you, other servants settle into the same exhausted stupor, their breathing the only sound in the servants' quarters. Tomorrow will bring the same tasks, the same invisible labor, the same pursuit of perfection that serves others comfort. You'll wake at 4:30, light the fires, sweep the carpets, dust the furniture, serve the meals, and disappear back into the shadows where servants belong. This is your life as a Victorian domestic servant, an existence so constrained and demanding that survival itself requires constant vigilance, perfect performance, and the ability to remain human while being treated as something less. Every task you perform, every surface you clean, every meal you serve is a small victory against impossible expectations. The great house runs smoothly because of your labor. The family's comfort depends on your sacrifice, and their luxury is built on your exhaustion. You are invisible but essential, unnoticed but indispensable, human but treated as a machine that cleans and serves and maintains, without complaint, in the darkness of your attic room. As sleep finally claims your exhausted body, you can hear the house settling around you, the sounds of wealth and comfort that your labor makes possible. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again, because that's what domestic servants do. They serve, they sacrifice, they disappear into the machinery of other people's lives, and they endure. The story of Sarah Mitchell begins in a village in Yorkshire, where she was born in 1851 to a family of farm laborers who worked the same fields their ancestors had tended for generations. Her father earned 9 shillings a week when work was available. Her mother took in washing to supplement their meager income, and Sarah was one of 7 children competing for food that was never quite enough. When Sarah was 12 years old, her mother died in childbirth, leaving behind a newborn who lived only 3 days, and a family that could no longer support itself on her father's irregular wages. The older children scattered to find work wherever they could: factories, farms, mills, anywhere that would pay a few shillings for young hands and strong backs. Sarah was sent to work at Thornfield Manor, a grand estate 30 miles from her village, farther than she had ever traveled from home. She carried her possessions in a cloth bundle, 2 worn dresses, a pair of shoes with holes in the soles, and a prayer book her mother had given her before she died. Thornfield Manor was a universe unto itself, a massive Georgian house set in parkland that stretched to the horizon, with gardens, stables, tenant farms, and outbuildings that housed an army of servants. The main house had 47 rooms, each filled with furniture, artwork, and possessions that represented wealth beyond Sarah's comprehension. Lady Pemberton, the housekeeper, was a stern woman who ruled the servants with absolute authority, maintaining order through a complex system of rules, hierarchies, and punishments that governed every aspect of domestic life. She explained Sarah's duties in terms that left no room for questions or complaints. "You are a scullery maid," Lady Pemberton announced, "the lowest position in this household. You will work in the kitchen, assist the cook, clean the servants' quarters, and perform any task assigned to you. You will speak only when spoken to, remain invisible to the family, and consider yourself fortunate to have employment in a respectable house. Sarah's world shrank to the basement kitchens, the servants' hall, and the narrow attic room she shared with 3 other maids. She rarely saw daylight, except during the brief moments when she carried coal from the cellar or emptied SLOP buckets in the yard behind the house. Her days began at 4 in the morning and ended after midnight, filled with an endless cycle of cleaning, scrubbing, carrying, and serving. She washed dishes until her hands were raw, scrubbed floors until her knees bled, carried coal scuttles until her shoulders ached with permanent pain. The kitchen was her primary workplace, a vast chamber dominated by a massive range that required constant feeding with coal, careful monitoring of temperatures, and endless cleaning to maintain the gleaming surfaces that reflected the cook's professional pride. Steam rose constantly from boiling pots, making the air thick and hot, difficult to breathe during the long summer months. Sarah learned to move efficiently in this crowded space, dodging other servants, avoiding the cook's temper, anticipating needs before they were expressed. She became expert at washing delicate china without breaking it, polishing copper pots until they gleamed like mirrors, and maintaining the complex equipment that made elaborate meals possible. The hierarchy below stairs was as rigid as any military organization. The butler commanded the male servants, the housekeeper controlled the female staff, and everyone understood their exact position in the chain of command. Sarah, as the newest and youngest maid, ranked at the very bottom, responsible to everyone and protected by no one. Meals in the servants' hall reflected this hierarchy precisely. The upper servants, butler, housekeeper, lady's maid, valet, sat at the head of the table and were served first. The middle servants, footmen, parlor maids, kitchen maids, occupied the center. Sarah and the other scullery maids sat at the foot of the table, eating whatever remained after their betters had taken their portions. The food was simple, filling, and monotonous. Bread, porridge, potatoes, occasional bacon or mutton. Tea that was weak and often cold by the time it reached the lowest servants. This diet was adequate for survival, but provided none of the variety or quality enjoyed by the family upstairs. Sarah's wages were £4 per year, plus room and board, paid quarterly if her service was satisfactory. This sum seemed enormous compared to her family's poverty, but it came with costs that weren't immediately apparent. She had to purchase her own uniforms, replace broken items from her wages, and pay for any medical treatment required if she became ill. The uniform itself was a constant reminder of her status: black dress, white apron, white cap, all of which had to be kept spotless despite the nature of her work. Replacing worn-out clothing consumed most of her wages, leaving little to send home to her family or save for her own future. Sarah's education had ended when she left home, but she continued learning through observation and necessity. She learned to read the moods of the upper servants, to anticipate the family's needs, to navigate the complex social codes that governed relationships below stairs. These skills were essential for survival in a world where a single mistake could mean dismissal without references. The work was physically demanding but also mentally challenging, requiring perfect memory, precise timing, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Sarah learned to carry multiple tasks in her mind simultaneously, to prioritize competing demands, and to maintain quality standards that would satisfy employers who noticed every imperfection. Illness was a luxury that servants couldn't afford. Sarah worked through colds, fevers, and injuries that would have sent family members to bed for days. She learned to hide pain, suppress coughs, and function effectively even when her body was crying out for rest and care. After 3 years at Thornfield Manor, Sarah was promoted to housemaid, a position that came with increased responsibilities but also greater prestige within the servants' hierarchy. She now worked in the family's living areas, maintaining the rooms where the real life of the house took place. trusted with valuable objects and sensitive information. This promotion brought her into closer contact with the family, though she remained essentially invisible to them. She learned their routines, their preferences, their relationships, and their secrets, but she was expected to be deaf and blind to everything she witnessed. A living piece of furniture that cleaned and served without memory or judgment. Sarah observed the family's children growing up, attending their lessons, playing their games, preparing for futures filled with possibilities she could never imagine. She watched their casual waste of food, clothing, and opportunities that would have transformed her life. But she was trained to feel grateful for the privilege of serving them, rather than resentful of the inequality. The lady of the house, Mrs. Thornfield, was a kind but distant figure who occasionally inquired about Sarah's health or family, but always in the formal manner of an employer checking on valuable property. These conversations were brief, polite, and ultimately meaningless. Gestures toward humanity that didn't cross the fundamental divide between servant and mistress. After 8 years of faithful service, Sarah had saved enough money to consider her future. She could continue as a housemaid, hoping for eventual promotion to lady's maid or even housekeeper, or she could leave service to marry and establish her own household. Both options required sacrifices that would shape the rest of her life. Sarah chose to remain in service, accepting a position as head housemaid at an even grander estate in London. This move represented advancement in her career, but also a deeper commitment to a life of service, a decision to find fulfillment and security within the narrow confines of domestic employment. She spent 15 more years in various positions, gradually climbing the servants' hierarchy through competence, loyalty, and the ability to manage other servants effectively. She became the kind of employee that wealthy families treasured, reliable, discreet, invisible when necessary, and utterly devoted to maintaining their comfort and status. Sarah never married, never had children of her own, never owned property or accumulated significant savings. Her life was devoted entirely to the service of others. Her identity defined by her ability to anticipate and fulfill the needs of employers who barely acknowledged her existence as a human being. She retired at the age of 55, worn out by 4 decades of physical labor, her body permanently bent from years of bending and scrubbing, her hands gnarled from constant work with harsh chemicals and hot water. Her pension was modest, barely enough to rent a small room and buy simple food, but it represented security after a lifetime of uncertainty. Sarah died in 1906, alone in her tiny room, her funeral attended only by a few former colleagues who had maintained contact despite the scattered nature of domestic employment. Her grave was marked with a simple stone that recorded her name and dates, with no mention of the decades she had devoted to serving others, the rooms she had cleaned, the meals she had served, the comfort she had provided to families who never really saw her as human. In the winter of 1878, something inexplicable began happening at Waverley House, a massive Victorian mansion in the Cotswolds. It started with reports from the servants about sounds that had no source, voices that spoke in empty rooms, and footsteps that echoed through corridors where no one was walking. The housekeeper, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, initially dismissed these reports as imagination run wild, the product of overworked minds and the Gothic atmosphere of the old house. But as the phenomena increased in frequency and intensity, she was forced to acknowledge that something genuinely unusual was occurring within the mansion's walls. The incidents began in the servants' quarters, where maids reported hearing conversations in rooms they knew to be empty, the sound of furniture being moved in chambers that had been locked for months, and the persistent feeling of being watched during their late-night duties. Mary Fitzgerald, a young housemaid who had worked at Waverley for 2 years without incident, reported seeing a woman in Victorian dress walking through the servants' hall at 3 in the morning. The figure wore the uniform of a lady's maid from an earlier era, complete with the high collar and long skirts that had been fashionable decades before. The apparition appeared solid, real, indistinguishable from a living person, except for the fact that she passed through closed doors and disappeared when directly confronted. Mary followed the figure through several rooms, watching as she performed the motions of daily work, dusting furniture, arranging flowers, setting tables with invisible dishes. Other servants began reporting similar encounters. A butler who appeared in the dining room to oversee meals that weren't being served. A cook who worked in the kitchen during hours when the ranges were cold and dark. Gardeners who tended flower beds that existed only in the manor's past. Mrs. Hartwell documented these reports with increasing concern, noting that the phantom servants seemed to be performing duties from different periods in the house's history. Some wore uniforms from the 1840s, others from the 1860s, and a few appeared to date from even earlier decades. The phenomena weren't limited to visual appearances. Servants reported finding their work completed by invisible hands, floors swept clean during the night, silver polished to perfection without explanation, fires laid in grates that had been cold and empty the evening before. Kitchen staff arrived each morning to find bread dough that had been kneaded and set to rise, vegetables chopped and arranged for cooking, and water heated to the perfect temperature for the day's tasks. The phantom kitchen workers seemed to maintain the same standards of efficiency and quality that governed the living staff. The family upstairs remained oblivious to these supernatural activities, sleeping peacefully while an army of ghost servants performed their eternal duties in the rooms below. The phenomena seemed confined to the working areas of the house, respecting the same boundaries that had separated servants from masters in life. Dr. Edmund Blackwood, a physician with interests in supernatural phenomena, was called to investigate the disturbances. He spent several nights at Waverly House, observing the phantom servants and attempting to understand the nature of their manifestations. Dr. Blackwood's notes described encounters that challenged his understanding of death, memory, and the persistence of human consciousness. He watched a ghostly housemaid clean the same window repeatedly, performing the motion with mechanical precision but no apparent awareness of her surroundings or situation. The phantom servants seemed trapped in routines that had once defined their existence, endlessly repeating tasks that no longer served any purpose. They dusted furniture that gathered no dust, served meals to diners who weren't there, and maintained standards of cleanliness and order that satisfied no living observer. Investigation revealed that many of the phantom servants could be identified from estate records as former employees who had died while in service at Waverly House. The ghostly lady's maid was Margaret Thornton, who had died of tuberculosis in 1863. The phantom butler was James Morrison, who had suffered a heart attack in the dining room in 1871. Some of the apparitions dated back even further, suggesting that the house retained the imprints of servants who had worked there for over 50 years. They appeared to be bound to Waverly House by the intensity of their devotion to duty, unable to rest while they perceived work left undone. The living servants found these encounters both terrifying and strangely comforting. The phantom workers never interfered with current duties, never caused harm or disruption, and actually seemed to make the daily work easier by completing tasks that would otherwise have required additional time and effort. Mrs. Hartwell established protocols for dealing with the supernatural staff, instructing the living servants to acknowledge the phantoms politely but continue with their assigned duties. This arrangement worked surprisingly well, creating a bizarre but functional harmony between the living and the dead. The phenomena continued for 6 months, gradually becoming less frequent as winter turned to spring. The phantom servants appeared less often, performed fewer tasks, and seemed to be fading away like morning mist. By summer, the supernatural manifestations had stopped completely, leaving only memories and detailed records of one of the most unusual hauntings in Victorian history. Dr. Blackwood theorized that the phantom servants were psychic imprints left by individuals whose identities had been so completely defined by their work that death couldn't release them from their duties. He suggested that the intensity of service required in Victorian households created emotional and spiritual bonds that transcended physical death. Modern researchers have proposed alternative explanations. Mass hallucination caused by stress and overwork, hoax perpetrated by servants seeking attention or reduced workloads, or misidentification of natural phenomena in an old house with poor lighting and acoustic anomalies. But Mrs. Hartwell's meticulous records, corroborated by multiple witnesses and investigated by credible observers, provide compelling evidence that something genuinely unexplained occurred at Waverley House during that strange winter of 1878 to 1879. The incident highlights the psychological pressure endured by Victorian domestic servants, working conditions so demanding that they might have driven vulnerable individuals to hallucinations or collective delusions. The phantom servants represented the ultimate expression of devotion to duty. Workers so dedicated that they continued their labor even after death. Whether real or imagined, the ghost servants of Waverley House embodied the Victorian ideal of domestic service, invisible, efficient, devoted to maintaining others' comfort without regard for their own needs or desires. They were the perfect servants, freed from the inconveniences of fatigue, illness, or human emotion. The house continues to operate today as a luxury hotel, and staff members occasionally report unusual phenomena reminiscent of the 1878 incidents. Guests sometimes mention hearing footsteps in empty corridors, seeing figures in period costume, or finding their rooms cleaned by invisible hands during the night. The legend of Waverley House's phantom servants has become part of the property's appeal, attracting visitors who hope to encounter the ghostly staff. Whether these modern sightings represent genuine supernatural activity or the power of suggestion, they ensure that the story of Victorian domestic service continues to capture imaginations more than a century after the original incidents. While Sarah Mitchell scrubbed floors and tended fires in the servants' quarters, a completely different world existed just a few floors above her head. This was the realm of Lord and Lady Thornfield, where life moved at a leisurely pace, governed by social conventions rather than survival necessities, shaped by pleasure rather than duty. Lady Catherine Thornfield woke each morning at 9 o'clock, not because any external force demanded it, but because that was the fashionable hour for a lady of quality to begin her day. Her breakfast was brought to her room by a lady's maid, who had been awake for 5 hours preparing for this moment. The breakfast tray was a work of art, delicate china painted with roses, silver cutlery polished to mirror brightness, linen napkins that had been pressed to crisp perfection. The food itself was prepared by a cook who had risen at dawn to ensure that every detail met the exacting standards expected in a great house. Lady Thornfield's morning ritual required the assistance of 3 servants, the lady's maid to arrange her hair and help her dress, the housemaid to prepare her sitting room, and the footman to carry messages and arrange her correspondence. This army of helpers enabled her to maintain the elaborate lifestyle that marked her social position. Her wardrobe occupied an entire room, filled with dresses for every occasion: morning gowns, afternoon dresses, dinner gowns, ball gowns, riding habits, and walking costumes. Each outfit required specific accessories, shoes, jewelry, and undergarments, creating combinations that took an hour to arrange properly. The process of dressing was a complex ceremony involving multiple layers of clothing, each requiring careful adjustment and precise positioning. The lady's maid, a skilled professional named Miss Andrews, had devoted years to mastering the art of creating the perfect appearance demanded by Victorian society. Lady Thornfield's daily routine was structured around social obligations rather than productive work. She received callers in the morning room, wrote letters in elegant script that took hours to compose, and planned elaborate dinner parties that required weeks of preparation by the household staff. Her meals were elaborate productions served in the dining room with ceremony appropriate to her station. Breakfast might include fresh fruit, hot breads, eggs prepared in multiple ways, bacon, sausages, and delicacies imported from London. The table was set with china and crystal worth more than most families earned in a decade. The family's lunch was served at 1 o'clock. A lighter meal, but still requiring the services of multiple servants, footmen to serve the courses, maids to tend the dining room, and kitchen staff to prepare dishes that would disappear in minutes, but had taken hours to create. Afternoon tea was a sacred ritual, served in the drawing room with precision that bordered on religious devotion. The tea service was silver, the cups were finest bone china, and the cakes and sandwiches were arranged with artistic flair. This daily ceremony required the coordinated efforts of cook, kitchen maids, and parlor maids, working in perfect harmony. Lady Thornfield's leisure activities included reading novels, practicing piano, painting watercolors, and corresponding with friends across the county. These pursuits filled her days, but produced nothing of practical value, representing the luxury of time that only wealth could purchase. Shopping expeditions to London were major events requiring advanced planning, multiple servants, and elaborate arrangements for transportation and accommodation. Lady Thornfield would spend hundreds of pounds on clothes, jewelry, and decorative objects, while her servants earned a few pounds per year. The contrast between upstairs and downstairs life was most obvious during the family's dinner parties, elaborate affairs that showcased their wealth and social position. The dining room would be transformed into a palace of crystal and silver, with flowers arranged by the gardener, table settings positioned with mathematical precision, and a menu designed to impress the most sophisticated palates. These dinner parties required the coordinated efforts of the entire household staff, the cook to prepare multiple courses, kitchen maids to assist with preparation, housemaids to clean and arrange the rooms, footmen to serve the meal, and the butler to oversee every detail with military precision. The family and their guests would consume this elaborate meal over several hours, discussing politics, literature, and social gossip while completely ignoring the army of servants who made their comfort possible. The staff remained invisible, present but unnoticed, like well-trained machines that performed their functions without conscious direction. After dinner, the guests would retire to the drawing room for conversation and entertainment, while the servants began the long process of cleaning up, washing dozens of dishes, polishing silver, cleaning crystal, and restoring the dining room to pristine condition for the next day's meals. Lord Thornfield's daily routine centered around managing his estate, though this management consisted largely of meeting with his steward, reviewing reports, and making decisions that others would implement. He had inherited wealth that required minimal effort to maintain, leaving him free to pursue interests like hunting, horse breeding, and local politics. His study was a shrine to masculine privilege, filled with leather-bound books, hunting trophies, and furniture that cost more than a servant's lifetime wages. He conducted business from this room, making decisions that affected hundreds of tenants and employees, but he rarely saw the human consequences of his choices. The family's children were raised by nurses and governesses, educated by private tutors, and prepared for lives of similar privilege. They learned to take service for granted, to expect their needs to be anticipated and fulfilled without conscious effort on their part, to regard servants as fixtures rather than human beings. When Lady Thornfield became ill at the age of 45, her care was provided by a personal maid who slept in her room, a nurse who attended her during the day, and a doctor who visited twice daily. The cost of this care exceeded the annual wages of a dozen servants, but it was considered a normal expense for a family of their position. She died surrounded by luxury that most people could never imagine: silk bed linens, fresh flowers changed daily, medicines imported from the continent, and constant attention from servants who catered to her every need. Her funeral was a grand affair attended by hundreds of mourners, many of whom had never spoken to her but felt obligated to pay their respects to her social position. The contrast between Lady Thornfield's death and the quiet passing of servants who died in service could not have been more stark. She was mourned publicly, remembered fondly, and honored with elaborate ceremony, while the servants who had devoted their lives to her comfort were quickly forgotten, replaced by new staff who would serve the family with the same invisible dedication. Lord Thornfield remarried within a year, choosing a younger woman who would continue the lifestyle that required constant service from dozens of employees. The great house continued to function exactly as before, consuming human labor to maintain luxury for the few who could afford it. The Thornfield family represented the pinnacle of Victorian society, people whose comfort was built on the labor of others, whose leisure was purchased with wages that barely sustained life, whose privilege was maintained by a system that treated human beings as disposable resources in the machinery of wealth. And so we leave the great Victorian houses, where the chandeliers gleamed bright and the servants moved like shadows, where comfort was built on invisible labor, and where the distance between upstairs and downstairs was measured not in feet, but in worlds. These faithful servants lived lives of quiet desperation, rising before dawn, working until midnight, maintaining standards of perfection that served others' pleasure. They polished silver that reflected other faces, cleaned rooms they could never inhabit, served meals they could never afford to eat. Sarah Mitchell and countless others like her devoted their lives to the service of families who barely acknowledged their existence, who took their labor for granted, who measured their worth only by their ability to remain invisible while maintaining visible comfort. The great houses still stand today, many of them preserved as museums where visitors marvel at the luxury of a bygone era. They admire the grand staircases, the elegant furnishings, the elaborate room arrangements, but few consider the human cost of maintaining such magnificence. As you drift off to sleep tonight, in your private room, with no one demanding your service, remember the Victorian servants climbing those narrow stairs to their attic quarters. Remember Sarah Mitchell, her hands cracked from lye soap, her back bent from endless scrubbing, her dreams limited to the hope of one day's rest. Their struggles are over, their service ended, their names mostly forgotten by the families they served so faithfully. But their legacy lives on, in every hotel that runs smoothly, every restaurant that serves with precision, every home that functions through the dedicated work of others. The bells that once summoned servants to duty have fallen silent. The great houses have become museums, and the rigid hierarchies that governed their lives have crumbled into history. But somewhere, in grand hotels and private homes, the tradition of service continues, carried on by people who understand that someone must tend the fires, clean the rooms, and maintain the comfort that others take for granted. The Victorian servants knew something that we sometimes forget, that civilization depends on the willingness of some to serve others, that comfort requires sacrifice, that the smooth functioning of society rests on the dedication of those who work in shadows, who remain invisible, who take pride in making other people's lives easier. Sleep well, knowing that your rest is your own, that your time belongs to you, that you wake when you choose and work for your own benefit. The servants of Thornfield Manor earned these freedoms for us through their sacrifice, their endurance, and their quiet dignity in the face of impossible demands. Their bells no longer ring, their stairs are no longer climbed, their uniforms hang empty in museum displays, but their spirit endures in everyone who serves others with grace, who works with pride despite humble circumstances, who finds dignity in labor that others take for granted. Good night.